every day before supper time. She'd go down and buy the truck patch.
Hey, this is Heath from Cereal at Midnight.
A mess of poke salad and carry it home in a toast sack. Poke salad.
Keep listening to Play That Rock and Roll.
You got your granny. Everybody said it was a shame, cause her mama was a working on a chain gang.
Started to talk a little bit about Elvis, and I know you are a big Elvis guy, and I just watched your interview with that film historian C. Courtney Joyner. Great conversation about Elvis movies, which is a topic I've always been curious about. I've never watched any of them, but I'm definitely interested in seeing at least a couple just to get a feel for like what that scene was. So kudos on a real good video there. Can you talk about, let's see here. Let's compare sort of appreciations for Elvis, because I'm going to tell you what my understanding of Elvis was, and then I wonder if it mirrors how you grew up with him. My original understanding of Elvis when I was a kid came from cartoons, paperback joke books, like sketch comedy, and it was all one thing: big, fat, drunk, pathetic, past his prime Elvis, died on the crapper. Perhaps the least cool musician that ever lived. The only people who liked him were my grandparents. Yeah. It was embarrassing if you even liked Hound Dog, that sort of thing. And becoming a teenager, I had a pretty strong resistance at listening to anything of his. But a couple of years ago, like I was telling you before we started, I went down to Memphis, visited Graceland, visited Sun Studios, and actually gave some of his catalog a proper listen. And it just made me sad that so much of my understanding of who this guy was framed in such a distorted way, given that, dude was legit talented and I think deserved the fame he had back in the day. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a product of when I grew up. But, when you were a kid, does any of this ring familiar to you, or did you have a different experience growing up with him?
Some of it does. I'm older than you, and so I guess that there's a level of snark and irony that's in your childhood that wasn't necessarily in mine. That came along in the 90s, but I have plenty of memories before that. I remember hearing some of those songs on the oldies station when I was a kid and really liking them. And then I do at some point, both Elvis and the Beatles, I thought I was too cool for. I thought that they were stupid. And I had a friend at my first job who was like, no. Here, and he handed me some tapes. He didn't hand me Elvis, but he handed me the Beatles. And then that kind of opened up everything, because the Beatles loved Elvis. Like Elvis is the genesis, you can go further back. You can go to like blues and stuff like that, but Elvis is the first guy that was like, okay, a little gospel, a little blues, a little country, and we're going to mix all that up, and then I'm going to package this into something like you've never seen before. The moves and stuff. There's that trailer for the Elvis movie coming out from Baz Luhrmann, and I don't love it because it's bordering on hero worship and like this real artificial thing. But what that trailer does and what it looks like the movie is going to capture is like he just gave birth to this whole movement of like, there was so much restrained energy. Like everybody, like there was a shock coming, and he was that culture shock. And it was the right place, the right time, the right music, the right sound, the right venue. He was polite, but he was dangerous AF. He was just really dangerous. And I went back. I didn't get in hardcore into Elvis until like 10 years ago, probably, because I kind of had that thing, where I was like, well, he's great. I recognize it's this thing where like I recognize his influence, but I don't connect with it. It doesn't have a lot for me. But as I've gotten older, you go back and you listen to some of those early records and you watch some of those performances, and definitely seek out some of those movies because, whoo, before all the beach movies and the vacation movies and the stuff where he was kind of just phoning it in, he was something else. He was really something else. And so, yeah, it's a shame that some of these guys, their legacy. Why Elvis? Why did Elvis have that? Is it because of the Vegas years? Is it because he gained so much weight? Is it because of the jumpsuits? I mean, yeah, it has to be. And the Beatles had such a short run, you know, they were less than a decade and they kind of went out on a high note. Elvis didn't do that. Elvis went out on a low note.
If you were talking to someone who maybe went to Graceland and came back and really wanted to get into his music, how would you direct that person? You know, would it be through the studio discography, or is Elvis a guy that you really got to appreciate in a concert, a video way?
I don't see it's neither for me. I would customize a playlist for somebody. I would recommend some greatest hits or something like that, because here's why. He doesn't have a great, well, I said this in a video one time and people ripped me apart. They're like, well, what about so-and-so? And like, well, that's your favorite, but that's not like his, you know, his masterpiece or anything. He doesn't have a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it's because he would go into the studio and just record blocks of songs. He wasn't a songwriter. And so he would have songs brought to him and he'd go in the studio and like, okay. And I enjoy that stuff now as an Elvis fan, but like, okay, in 1972, he goes into the studio for 2 weeks and he records like 39 tracks. And then those get piecemealed out over the next 3 years and they get sweetened up with strings and all this stuff. And that's not how anybody else was making. I mean, that's how Tom Jones was making albums like that. People were making albums like that, but that's not how the greats were making their, you know, the Beatles or the Stones or whoever. You look at how Exile on Main Street was created, where they go get this, you know, this huge house and just do a ton of drugs and write and record, move the stuff into the hallway because it's got a good sound. Like none of that doesn't apply to Elvis. But there's lots of greatness there. And if he believed in something, he would really focus in on it and do everything he could to make it shine. So for me, I think that those early years are pretty spectacular. The mid 50s stuff. Are
there any specific compilations that you know of that kind of thread the needle of getting the right tracks, you know, that would be suitable for like a beginner?
There is, let me look it up. I got it on my phone because I keep my music on my phone.
Nice.
The Essential Elvis Presley. There's a 3-disc compilation called The Essential Elvis Presley, and it starts at the beginning as it's loading right now.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's taking so long. Starts with That's All Right, Mystery Train, which is great. Freaking love Mystery Train. Blue Suede Shoes, all that stuff. And then it goes through the best of his soundtrack stuff, which, you know, say what you will about the movies, and it's all hit or miss. It's all hit or miss, but the hits are good. And there's stuff there. And then when, like the Viva Las Vegas is from a movie. That's, if you want to start with Elvis, I'd say start with Viva Las Vegas probably because it's the most accessible.
Yeah.
And I love that song too. And then he kind of rediscovers in the late 60s that like, wait, I'm kind of tired of doing these terrible movies, which I like some of those terrible. I like a lot of those terrible movies, and they're not all terrible, but that's the consensus.
Right.
He comes back. He's like, it gets really serious about it. And out of that, you got Suspicious Minds and you got A Little Less Conversation. You know, that's a great one. Boss Man, that's a good one too.
Yeah.
Polk Salad Annie, which is in the movie. What is that movie? Ford v Ferrari. They play that song 3 times. That was my joke when I saw Ford. Now it's not the Elvis version. It's an instrumental, but I was like, you can judge a movie based on how many times they play Polk Salad Annie. And they played it 3 times in the movie. And then it kind of descends from there into the bloated, you know, syrupy. Moody Blue is one of the last Elvis songs, and for me, it's like that's not even Elvis, but
yeah,
somebody's gonna hear this and be that's my favorite Elvis song, and you're not wrong if it is. So
yeah,
I would say that, and if you, as a visual point, start with the '68 comeback special if you want to see him really. What the music was capable of. He's at the peak of his powers in the '68 comeback special.